Hey, what's going on everyone? This is Ambro with AMBG, and today I want to talk about why the Nintendo Switch is winning. Now, before you get out your pitchforks and your torches, just know that I am not a fanboy. I own all the platforms. I owe no allegiance to any company because frankly, they don't care about me. They only care about my money. Video games are for everyone and should be able to be played by anyone. That being said, if you're a grown adult arguing over which plastic box is better than the other, then you've probably got bigger things to worry about. But anyway, let's get to it. In this video, I want to talk about why the Nintendo Switch is winning. And I'm not talking about winning as in over a console war, I'm just talking about winning in general. The Nintendo Switch in its relatively short lifespan has accomplished pretty incredible things, overcoming some pretty big odds against it, but we'll get into that. So let's just get right into it, and remember, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to support the channel, consider subscribing. Anyway, let's talk first about who the Nintendo Switch is for. The Nintendo Switch, frankly, appeals to such a large demographic of gamers, and that's not solely due to the fact that it is a hybrid console, as we're calling it, where it has the ability to be played as a mobile device, but also being able to be docked to your TV and play it like a traditional console. But the biggest thing that you see with the Nintendo Switch nowadays is that it's more of a supplementary game system to an Xbox, a PlayStation, or a PC. In the current gaming era that we live in, there are more and more people that own multiple platforms for gaming. The Switch is also perfect for people who are on the move that want to have a console-like experience in the palm of their hands. Now, I know that there are going to be graphic snobs that are going to come at me and be like, why would you ever want to play a game at 720p and 30 FPS and blah, 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 blah. I would take a game with crappy graphics and good gameplay and good game design over the opposite. I'm talking to you, Anthem. Another big reason that the Switch appeals to so many gamers out there is due to the fact that it has very strong third-party support, which is something that Nintendo has struggled with in the past. Yes, I'm talking to the 10 people that bought a Wii U. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. But it's true, if you remember the Wii U had almost no third-party support, to the point where it barely played any third-party games at all, which is a shame because the Wii U had some really good killer apps for the system. And maybe if Nintendo had marketed it better, it would have gotten better third-party support. Or, you know, maybe not named it the Wii U and confused tens of millions of people. It had games like Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, Bayonetta 2, Super Mario 3D World, and more. Yes, all these games can now be played on the Switch, but at the time, that was the only system that you could play these games on. Now listen, I know that these games aren't for everyone. In fact, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to come at me and say, why would I want to play these kiddie games? Well, because there is a large majority of people that are into these type of games. And again, they don't view the Switch as a competitor to their main gaming device. For all I know, the Switch might be your main gaming device, but for a lot of people, it does kind of act as a backup for a lot of gamers that I do know. Most people do play on their PC or their Xbox or their PlayStation, which again is perfectly fine. But that's really what I want to get into and how Nintendo is doing such a good job. And that is because Nintendo has done such a good job at separating themselves from the power narrative that is being pushed by Xbox and PlayStation. They never bought into the 4K hype or super high frame rates or anything like that. Do you remember all the marketing for the PlayStation Pro and the Xbox One X? The Switch just said, you know what? Nope, I'm gonna do my own thing. And that's ultimately what makes the Switch so great, is that it knows what it wanted to be and it stuck to it. It has been a long time since Nintendo has competed at a power level, going all the way back to the Nintendo GameCube. Ever since the GameCube, they have not tried to compete on a power level. They've been criticized for it, and yet they've still been highly successful. Barring that Wii U, of course. And before I go on, a console's value as a gaming system isn't determined by lifetime sales. That's simply in the eye of the gamer. Now let's really get into the separation that Nintendo has created on purpose. Nintendo has dominated the handheld gaming market, geez, for as long as I can remember. With all their different lines of Game Boys and Nintendo DS's and now the Switch acting as their primary device. There was a time when Sony had the PSP and the PS Vita, but those times are long gone. The really interesting thing that Nintendo has done with the Switch is that the fact that they've been able to combine both their handheld gaming market and their home console market into a single device. And what this allows Nintendo to do with their first-party developers is to put all of their focus and energy into a single SKU. And as a result, you have these super high-quality games that can be picked up and played at any time. It's convenient. There's simply people who just don't have a lot of time to turn on their Xbox or their PlayStation or their PC and sit down and play an extended gaming session. Sometimes they only have enough time to pick up their Switch a few minutes before bed, get in a mission, and then go to sleep. Convenience really is the name of the game. I mean, if you thought about having Nintendo Switch 20 years ago, having the power of a console in the palm of your hands, you'd be crazy to say that. The fact that you're able to play games as big as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Skyrim, and even The Witcher 3 on the go, on a plane, on the bus is such a big selling factor. But the sheer convenience of being able to do it for the people that don't have that dedicated time is the main selling point for a lot of gamers. And plus, hey, you can play it on the toilet. Now, if we're going to talk about sheer numbers and revenue in terms of how Nintendo is succeeding, well, they've done a pretty good job at that too. And in fact, out of the big three gaming powerhouses being PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo, Nintendo is the only company company out of those three that sell their consoles for a profit, at least for the first few years. Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 are being sold at a loss currently. The Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 were sold at a loss for the first few years of its lifespan. And the next big thing for Nintendo is their software sales, and my god, does Nintendo do a good job at this. Now, you see a lot with the Xbox versus the PlayStation narrative. You know, oh, the PlayStation is selling their exclusives, you know, Horizon Zero Dawn sold 10 million copies, or God of War sold X amount of copies, and that is a lot of copies. But when you actually talk about the attachment rate of those exclusive games versus how many consoles in total that it sold, it's actually a lot smaller than you might think. 10 million copies is a lot of games, but compared to 110 million consoles sold, that's actually under a 10% attachment rate. Now, as of December 31st, 2020, the Nintendo Switch had sold over 79 million units. Now, one of the Nintendo Switch's highest selling games is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, selling over 33 million copies. Animal Crossing New Horizons, over 30 million copies. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, over 20 million copies. I'm gonna leave the math to you, but you can see what the point I'm making is. Nintendo's brand recognition and brand loyalty is probably the strongest out of any of the big three. And yeah, Xbox and PlayStation both have very long-running franchises that are the faces of the system. You can think of Halo, you can think of God of War on the PlayStation side, but none of them are as recognizable as the Italian Plumber or the little yellow Shocky Mouse. Now, if we sum up all the things that we've talked about so far, and then add on top of that, that as of last year, that the Nintendo of America president, Doug Bowser, said that he believes the Nintendo Switch is at its midpoint of its life cycle, that's pretty crazy to think about, that the Switch is still actually hard to come by at this day and age. Probably not as hard as trying to find a PS5 or an Xbox Series X, or even a graphics card for your PC. But still, these are crazy times. Now, that's not to say that Nintendo and the Switch don't have its downsides. I have to be fair, I gotta give credit where it's due, and I also have to criticize where it's deserved. First one being the Joy-Con drift. That was a huge deal when that started coming to light, and this is something that Nintendo really should have done a better job on. Especially for a handheld device. You're gonna be using it a lot. From what I heard, in some regions, the repair process was pretty simple, but in others, it was a horrible experience. And a lot of people ended up having to spew out tons of cash in order to buy new Joy-Cons. Which actually brings me to the next part, and that is how expensive Nintendo parts can be. $70 for a Pro controller? It's a really good controller, don't get me wrong. The battery life is unusually long, but $70? I think that's just a little steep. Another thing that is eventually going to catch up with Nintendo is the power differential. Now, we know we talked about before where that was actually a good thing that Nintendo was able to separate itself from the power narrative. For the first-party developers, at some point, are going to be limited by the hardware. Their creativity might become so robust and so innovative, but then all of a sudden they look at the insides of the Nintendo Switch or whatever their next console is, and you're like, man, I don't think we can pull this off. Console developers work within the constraints given to them by the hardware, and as creative as Nintendo is, I think that at some point it's going to catch up with them. However, with the new consoles and the PS5 and Xbox Series X being out now, and the power gap being so wide, you're going to see that third-party support is going to start to dwindle. Now, with the recent rumors of the 4K Nintendo Switch Pro possibly on the horizon, we'll have to keep our eye out for that, but that would make sense for them to do. I think one of the last and probably the biggest things that Nintendo in general has to figure out, not just with the Switch, is their online services. Their online services are a complete and utter embarrassment in comparison to PSN and Xbox Live. The fact that you have to have an app on your phone in order to join a voice chat is just ridiculous, especially considering how many online games that they actually have. Mario Kart, Splatoon, Mario Party, Smash Bros. None of them have any voice chat support natively through the Switch. You have to go through the mobile app. It's 2021. It's about time that they started investing into a party chat system natively on their consoles. Another thing that really bothers me is that they don't have any matchmaking abilities for games like Mario Party. I understand that Mario Party is more of a local co-op type of experience, but there are a lot of people who like to play solo. Like, why have the ability for Mario Kart, which actually needs to support more players than Mario Party ever would have to? I just don't understand the decision making on that level. I get the toxicity argument, but it's still something that I think that they should add. Whether or not these things are all priorities for Nintendo, well, we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for sticking around. I hope that you enjoyed it. As I mentioned, I really don't have any allegiance to any of these game companies. In fact, my next few videos, I'm going to go over why the Xbox is winning and why the PlayStation is winning. And at the end of the day, competition breeds excellence, and we as the gamers are reaping all of the benefits. If you liked the video, remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to support the channel, consider subscribing. I'll catch you guys next time.